Unfortunately for the Kiev regime and its so-called Western allies, the Russian army continues to gain tactical and even strategic victories on the battlefield. Even ardent pro-Ukrainian Western analytical centers have to admit the obvious successes of the Russian troops on the battlefield. In particular, after the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation officially confirmed the liberation of such strategically important settlements as Orlovka and Tonenk, in Avdiivka direction of the front, American military experts from the Institute for the Study of War, in their recent articles, radically changed their tone and finally were forced to admit the obvious successes of the Russian army. Moreover, American experts also recognize the fact that the Russian High Military Command has significantly increased the production of heavy military equipment and other types of heavy weapons, which allowed the Russian army to effectively maintain the pace of offensive operations along the entire line of combat contact. In addition, the Americans also announced that the Russian High Military Command had begun creating powerful reserve formations to support a full-scale offensive in the Donetsk direction of the front, with the aim of the complete and final liberation of Donbass. According to them, this offensive will be carried out in the summer of 2024, and the armed forces of Ukraine, even despite the support of the West, will most likely not be able to stop the advance of Russian troops. In general, American experts admitted that the Russian troops will deal a crushing blow to the Ukrainian armed forces in the summer of 2024. Meanwhile, it became known about new successes of the Russian troops, this time in the Bakhmut direction of the front. So, on March 23, 2024, at 3 p.m. Moscow time, war correspondents reported that the Russian army had liberated the village of Krasnoy, southeast of the Chasiv Yar. According to them, as a result of fierce fighting and competent tactical actions of the Ivanova paratroopers, the Russian army managed to push back the remnants of the armed forces of Ukraine from the western outskirts of this village. At the same time, it is worth recognizing that taking control of the village of Krasnoy made it possible for the Russian army to inflict effective fire damage on the armed forces of Ukraine not only in the direction of the city of Chasiv Yar, but also the village of Kleshchievka, where the Ukrainian army still controls part of the territory of this settlement. This became possible because the village of Krasnoy is located on a hill, and this fact has significantly strengthened the combat capabilities of the Russian artillery. Thus, the war correspondents expressed confidence that the armed forces of Ukraine also would soon be forced to flee from the outskirts of Kleshchievka. Meanwhile, very serious problems began to be observed in the North Atlantic Alliance, as a result of which the NATO leadership flew into an uncontrollable panic. The fact is that while the Russian army was rapidly turning into the world's most powerful combat force, ordinary soldiers and even officers of Western armies began to write massively reports on the dismissal from service. Countries such as Poland, Finland, and Germany have faced this problem the most. These countries have the largest number of soldiers and officers who have been dismissed from military service voluntarily. Moreover, the citizens of these countries even began to leave the army's reserves so that the government would finally lose the opportunity to send them to die for other people's interests and values. Against this background, the European Union is seriously thinking in decreeing universal compulsory military service. In order to somehow remedy the situation with the shortage of manpower in the regular army, the Danish government even proposed to recruit women to somehow compensate for the shortage of soldiers and officers in the ranks of the armed forces. But, why did people in the West begin to refuse military service en masse? The fact is that the West was not ready for a confrontation with a strong rival. Moreover, the West was not ready for a long-term confrontation with a strong rival. The conflict in Ukraine has revealed a very large number of problems in the armies of NATO countries. As it turned out, European countries, including Britain, did not pay due attention to the development and maintenance of their armed forces. Since the 90s of the last century, European countries have relied entirely on the military protection of the United States, investing most of their funds in the economy rather than the armed forces. This explains the low salaries of officers of European armies, and the poor quality of even ordinary barracks. That's why British submarines and warships have a constant problem with individual parts, and their missiles don't want to fly. In fact, in the West, only the US Army represents at least some serious military force, while the rest of the Western countries have almost completely lost their military potential. At the same time, it is worth recognizing that unlike the United States and other Western countries, Moscow does not spend its funds on maintaining numerous military bases and purchasing weapons from third-party countries, but constantly creates and develops its own new types of weapons, significantly increasing Russia's military potential and scientific base. All this indicates that in case of direct military confrontation between NATO and Russia, the North Atlantic Alliance with its poorly trained and inexperienced Western armies, which are used to opposing only admittedly weak rivals, will overwhelmingly lose to Russian troops on the battlefield. This fact is recognized even by many Western experts. The fact is that, unlike European countries, Russia has never stopped investing huge amounts of money in the development of its army and navy. Even in the 90s of the last century, when Russia was barely surviving from an economic point of view, the development of the Russian army never stopped. As a result, in the 21st century, Moscow received at its disposal the world's most powerful military force, which can now defend Russia's national interests even in the face of dozens of enemies.